Hello, everyone. From CritiqueMatch, we're thrilled to have everyone for our second webinar with pro-critiquer Jackie H. We're going to talk about ways to critique someone's work without being harsh. Just a quick introduction about our pro-critiquer Jackie. Jackie provides editing services for authors of both fiction and nonfiction. In addition to her freelance work, she serves as a writing tutor for undergraduate students, as well as graduate students through Pearson. She has worked in writing services for more than a decade. She holds a PhD in history from Emory University and has completed her dissertation in 2013, and her essays have been published by Oxford Dictionary of National Biography and Palgrave Macmillan.
It's a mouthful, right?
The event will be recorded, so if you're not okay with that, please feel free to remove your camera and just keep the audio. And while everyone's lines are muted, feel free to ask questions along the way using the chat function, and Jackie will answer at the end. And with that, I will pass it over to Jackie to take it from here.
Thank you so much. So first of all, thank you all for being here. I had realized along the way that maybe this webinar is a little bit ironic, because if you're tuning into it, I suspect you may not be someone who's leaving the harshest of harsh critiques. But I think there's room for all of us to take a step back, to look at the way we're communicating with our partners, and to think about ways that we could be doing that in an even more constructive way. So I'm not going to say what you're doing, what anyone is doing isn't good enough now. What I'm going to say is, let's take a look at a few strategies. I've got 10 strategies for you, and let's think about how you can make those critiques even better, so that when they read from the other side, they read as genuine and encouraging and constructive. So we're going to talk about 10 strategies tonight, and I'm thinking of these strategies kind of like a menu. So some of these strategies you are going to hear and your ears are going to perk up, and you might say, like, that's what I'm missing. If I did that, that would make me feel better about presenting this really tough problem to a critique partner. And then there are going to be some of them that you're going to say, that does not work for me. I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. That's okay. Take the ones that work with you, take the rest and stick them in your toolbox. Maybe someday you'll come back to them. Maybe you won't ever, but I think it's a good thing for you to know what works well for you as a critique partner and what works well for all of your partners. So this is a menu, pick and choose. So we've got the first 5 here, and then I'll just switch over to the second 5. And I'm going to talk through each of these strategies. I'm going to talk to you kind of at a basic level how I think you can implement them, that you could go tonight and go back to a critique that you've been working on and kind of feed them in, or at least give them a try. And I'm going to make the case to you, and I'm going to try to show to you through every strategy that using every one of these strategies is actually a time investment that's good for your own writing. That there's going to be some time and work that's involved in incorporating some of these strategies, but that time is never wasted, because that's time that you're also investing in your own writing. And that's time that ensures that your partner is able to process your critique. Because the second your partner shuts down, the second they feel it's too harsh and the wall goes up, you've wasted all of the time writing all of those wonderful critiques for them. So we want to make sure that the time you invest helps them be able to process that better. So my first strategy, never miss a chance to praise your partner. And I know that I told you that this is a menu, and you should feel free to just throw some of these suggestions out, and I mean it. But this is the one that I would say, I hope that everyone at least gives some consideration to. Never miss a chance to praise your partner. And if you just had kind of a strong negative reaction to that, I get it. I absolutely get it. Because it's easy to hear that and think what I mean is, tell your partner that everything is rainbows and butterflies and there's nothing they should fix. It's perfect just the way it is. And that's not what I mean at all. I do not want you to ever make praise up. I do not want you to make it up ever. But if you have a positive reaction to something, tell them. Even if it seems like it's something super duper small, tell them. That's letting them know what works. And that's as much a part of constructive criticism as the parts where you tell them where something isn't working. Because as writers, we need to know what works just as much as we need to know what needs improvement, right? So if you have a reaction to something, if you laughed or you cried or you sucked in air or you wanted to hug a character or you wanted to shove a character, tell them. It takes seconds to put that little comment box in, but it's going to make all the difference to your partner. Because when your partner gets a critique that's just criticism after criticism after criticism, it's really easy not only for them to get discouraged, but also for them to go into that shutdown mode. Okay, this person just doesn't get me. They don't get my writing. They don't get what I'm doing here. They just weren't a good fit for me. I'm done. And then you have wasted every minute you invested in that critique. We're not going to have that. What happens when you never miss a chance to praise your partner is that now your partner can divide those comments into two discrete categories. Here's the stuff that's working, and here's the stuff that needs some work. And they're going to be open to the idea that there's some stuff that needs some work if they also know that there's some stuff that's already working really well. So by making sure your partner understands that those are two discrete categories, what you're doing is opening up the space for them to really invest in you and invest in your comments. And it's a challenge. There are some times where, you're reading a manuscript and you have to dig deep to say, okay, what is really working well here? That challenge is an investment in your own writing. Because, if you've got a manuscript from a partner and it's got, slips in the point of view and the pacing is a little bit slow and, there's not, the characters are a little bit one-dimensional. And then there's this scene. There's this one scene that's so good that it just sort of rises up out of the manuscript. It just stands out on its own. Well, guess what? You're going to put that in your toolkit. You're going to remember the things about that scene that really made it stand out, and you're going to tuck that away. And someday when you're working on a project of your own, you're not going to replicate your partner's scene, but you're going to play with those same ideas that they were using. Maybe it's a flashback, or maybe it's a really rich description of a setting, or maybe it's song lyrics. Whatever it is, you're going to remember, you know what, even in kind of a wishy-washy manuscript, this was amazing. And I said at the beginning, and I'll probably say it about 100 more times tonight, but do not ever manufacture this. It is not helpful for your partner for you to make up positive reactions. It's pretty easy usually in like the cadence of a story to see where a partner is trying to make a joke and, not laugh, but want to kind of make them feel good and say, oh my gosh, cracked me up here. Don't do it. Because it takes no real mental investment to make things up, and it's not helpful. It's a waste of time to you, and it's a waste of your time, of time for your partner. I would rather you dig in deep and really come up with something that you think really works and hone in on that, even if it's not on every page, even if it's not what you think your partner would want you to notice. Praise them when it comes up for you. So that's strategy number one. Never miss a chance to praise your partner. Strategy number two, step away from the red pen. I realize this is probably an outdated image, but it worked better than step away from the track changes or step away from the comment boxes. What I mean when I say step away from the red pen is Don't send your partner back a wall of changes or a wall of comments. And I think this is one that's especially difficult to put into practice because we are overachievers. And so it's difficult for us to feel like, oh, well, I mean, if I don't mention everything, then I'm ignoring stuff. I'm sort of doing a disservice to this person who trusted me. But stick with me, because I am going to make the case to you that in 99% of circumstances, you should not mark every problem you see. So step away from the red pen. Here's something to keep in mind. And I have been a college professor. I'm currently a college writing tutor. I work with students pretty frequently. My clients are not my students. My critique partners are not my students. They are my partners. We are peers. And so I think when we start to get a little out of control with that red pen is that we start to go into professor mode, or we start to go into teacher mode. And we do it with the best of intentions. Most people, when they do this, don't intend for it to be harsh. They think they're doing a really loving thing by pointing out everything to make the draft better. But once you start to slip into that kind of teacher student mode, or into that expert novice mode, everything starts to get a little bit condescending. So I am releasing you from that obligation officially tonight. You are not a professor, you are a partner. You are not responsible for teaching your partner all about writing. You are not responsible for calling out every single weakness that you see. Your partners are your peers, they're not your students. Do you feel it? Do you feel the pressure lifting off? You are not responsible for teaching. You are collaborating with them, which means you're going to invest time in your end for sure, but you're not responsible for making your partner's piece into what you think would be perfect. You're going to give them some suggestions. They're going to take some of them and they're going to put some of them away. But it is a collaboration. You don't have to teach them to be a better writer. That's not your job. And don't assume that your partner doesn't know the rules. And I actually just came up with an example of this within the last few days. I was just finished up a book where we've got a first person narrator and it's kind of written through journal entries. And the narrator has these sort of random words capitalized for no reason that's really apparent. And it never really comes out in the text why it's like that, although by the end, you can sort of start to read between the lines. Well, if I had gotten that from my critique partner and went through and highlighted every time they capitalized a T when they shouldn't have, man, that is condescending, right? Don't assume your partner doesn't know the rules. But you don't necessarily need to assume your partner does know the rules either. First of all, you can always say, hey, I'm going to use this term. If you don't know what that means, ask me. Most of us haven't been in our high school AP English textbooks in a very long time. So if it doesn't make sense to you, go ahead and ask me. But what it's also going to do is work the other way. Your partner may very well know the rules and be breaking them on purpose. So that's where that collaboration becomes really important. Before you get started on their work, you want to ask your partner what they need. And I always, before I start a manuscript, say to my partners, say to my authors, hey, if there's anything you want me to keep a lookout for, let me know. And if there's anything that you absolutely do not want me to touch, let me know. Because you may be misspelling something for a very important reason that's not going to come up for a while, or may never come up. It's sort of subtext. So you can step away from the red pen because you're going to ask your partner, what do you think you really need from me? What is going to work for you? Strategy number 3. And this, I think, is a tough one too. Remember that your partner already knows that their draft needs work. But it also probably goes without saying, you don't need to convince them that their draft needs work. And that's where I think sometimes we can tend to veer into into harsh territory because we see a problem and we want to point it out every single time because, well, gosh, if I don't point it out every single time, they're not going to know what a monumental problem this is turning out to be. Well, what happens is your partner ends up with that wall of red, they shut down, and you've wasted every minute that you spent pointing out every single time they had a slip in verb tense. They already know the draft needs work. You don't have to convince them by pointing out every flaw. I think sometimes we also do it because the anxiety starts to kick in, right? Oh my gosh, if I don't point out every single one, they're going to miss it. They're not going to know that it's really here. They're not going to see every one. Take a deep breath. You're not responsible single-handedly for transforming your partner's critique, for transforming your partner's manuscript. And when you can take that pressure off yourself, take a deep breath and recognize that you're just here to help where you can, your feedback becomes a lot kinder. I think it sometimes happens too, because the way that most of us outside of critique partnerships, the way we write about other books is in reviews, right? And in a review, the book has already been written. And if we really didn't like it, then we may be picking it apart, and we can, there's a whole nother webinar there about whether that's actually helpful or not. I'm not so sure it is, but in any case, that author gave us a finished product. They believed it was done. They believed it was ready to go. And so when we call them out in reviews, that's a totally different category. Our critique partners know that their drafts need work, so we don't have to hammer it home. And the reason that a lot of us write critiques is that we're customers, right? We spent good hard-earned money on this book and it wasn't worth our time to read it. When you are reading your critique partner's work, you are not a customer. That manuscript was a gift. You didn't pay a dime for it, and they gave it to you in good faith. So you are going to treat it with all of the grace that you would treat a gift with, whether or not you love it. Strategy number 4 is ask questions instead of giving directives. And I already messed it up, right? Because the screen should probably say, maybe you should ask some questions instead of directing you to ask questions. But if you'll forgive me, I promise I do recognize the irony here that I'm directing you to do this. But when we tell our partner, you should do this, or you should do that, or this doesn't work here, we're already back to setting up that kind of expert novice relationship. And we don't want that. We want to stay as far away from that as we can. We're partners, we're collaborators, we're peers. But a lot of times we can convey that exact same message by asking questions, which on the other end feels a lot less harsh to your partner. And it actually makes them feel empowered, because what you're doing is reminding them that this is their baby. So you've got a question and they've got all the answers. That's powerful, right? So maybe an example would be helpful here. So I should say, I promise that these are totally pure examples that I made up for this webinar. They are not from any real critiques that I've done. So none of my authors have to worry about that. But if any of my critique partners are out there and hear this, they will tell you that this is pretty close to exactly the way I frame almost all of my comments in their manuscripts. So they're fake, but they're real. So in the first one, I am telling my partner what's wrong, right? And I am telling them what I think they need to do. And you may be kind of laughing to yourself a little bit, right? Because, that's not an incredibly harsh comment to make. In context, pulled out right here on the screen. But if my partner were to get a manuscript back that had a comment like this on every single page, well, that starts to get overwhelming. And that's when our partners start to shut down, and that's when we've wasted our time as their critique partners. In the bottom two, though, I'm giving my partner full ownership over their work. I'm not telling them what to do because, as sad as this makes me, I am not the goddess of all writing. I do not have all the answers. I am just pointing out, hey, as a reader, I'm kind of confused here. So maybe other readers would be confused here too. But I am starting from the assumption that my partner is fully capable of answering those questions. They don't need me to tell them what to do. They just need me to open up a space where they can answer that question for themselves. The other reason that I think that it's important to phrase as much as you can in questions instead of directives is that it's possible you got it wrong. And I do this all the time. I'll read a manuscript, I'll leave myself a note that says, I have no idea where this came from. Why is she suddenly walking here instead of riding the bus? And I'll move on and I'll finish the draft. And then I'll go through on my second read. And on my second read, I'll go, oh, well, because I just wasn't paying enough attention. There's actually this whole paragraph right here that explains why she's walking and not riding the bus. Well, if I had said to my critique partner in that comment, hey, this makes no sense. Why is she riding the bus here? That you haven't given us any context for that. Well, what I've just told my partner is, A, I am not paying that much attention, but I am more than happy to give you any criticism that I can think of. And it tells them that I'm not really invested in their work. I wasn't really invested in, taking the time to flip back a few pages and see if I could figure out what was going on, because it was there. And so they can go back and write more, and then they're going to end up over explaining a concept that really doesn't need to be explained any further. They did. I was just wrong. I just missed it. So when you ask a question instead, and I do this all the time, hey, I might have missed this, or my favorite one is, I might have it wrong here, so take it with a grain of salt. That usually comes after something that has to do with math, because my brain doesn't do numbers. And so if I have a question like, I did the math and the years don't really add up to me, I'm going to start it with, take it with a grain of salt, because I might just have it wrong here, but these numbers don't add up. And my partner knows, double check that, because I get that wrong all the time. I might be wrong. But again, we are handing ownership of that piece back over to our partner. We are not telling our partner, hey, you've got things that you need to fix and you don't know how to fix them, so I'm going to tell you. We are telling them, hey, I noticed these things that could be stronger. I think you can do it. You are rad. You have all the answers. So I'm opening up the question, and then you are going to fill it in with an answer. And I think that is powerful. That's what I want from a critique partner. I want a critique partner that trusts that I have it in me to make all of the changes that need to be made. Strategy number 5. Never make a critique without giving a suggestion. And this is the one where you can see the time adding up on your clock, right? Every time I make a critique, I have to make a suggestion. This really does a few things in terms of what could turn a harsh critique into a more kind of constructive, engaging, supportive one. Because first, if you're following this strategy, there is a very good chance that you are already stepping away from the red pen. You are already going to have to make fewer critiques, or else you are never going to get this manuscript read, right? And that's a good thing. We are not going to mark every weak spot. We are going to highlight the places where we have something helpful to contribute. And that's the constructive part of constructive criticism. I'm not going to point out every flaw. I'm going to point out places where I think I might have something to help. I might have something to add. If I say, like something just doesn't work, that's just criticism. But if I say, this doesn't really work right now, but maybe if you did something like this, it could work better, that's constructive. That's helping my partner build rather than tearing them down. So again, I've got just a couple of examples here. So in the first one, obviously, I've got a question as a reader, but you would never really know it because I'm just laying down statements. I'm laying them down like they're facts. And again, in the context of what we've seen, probably a lot of us have seen really harsh critiques. This one isn't so terrible. But imagine if you've got one of these on every other page, it starts to wear you down. And I'm not actually sure it gets my partner that much closer to the manuscript they want to write. I'm not sure that it actually gives them the kind of feedback that's going to help them build. The second one is a bit better because I'm not telling my partner that they got it wrong. I'm telling them that I'm having trouble here. And of course, they've got it in them to help their readers. I don't need to tell them what to do. And then in the last one, I'm pointing out where I'm struggling as kind of a representative reader. I'm struggling here, maybe other readers will too. But I'm also making a suggestion. Now listen, that suggestion might not work for my partner. In fact, my partner may have a very conscious reason that they didn't introduce that idea in the very first chapter. But thinking about it, maybe there are a couple of other conversations in the manuscript with Carl, and maybe one of those is just perfect for sliding this information in. So my suggestion isn't a directive. It's just opening up a space for them to think through their options for answering this question, for resolving this, what I see as a weakness. And I'm going to highlight one word that I use in that last one, and that's maybe. Usually we think of maybe as being kind of a weak word. It's wishy-washy, right? We use maybe when we don't want to commit to anything. Yeah, that's what we want here. This is not my manuscript. I am just offering a suggestion. I don't have to be firm in that. Maybe is powerful because what it says to my partner is, I'm your partner. I'm telling my partner, I think this could use something else. And what comes to mind is this, but what do you think? I'm turning that back over to them. It's open-ended. And on the other end, my partner might absolutely hate that suggestion. And that's okay. I am never offended when my partners dismiss one of my suggestions because, again, they've got it. They are capable of making this story what they want it to be. But maybe that suggestion is going to spark another idea. And you know what? Frankly, that idea is probably a lot better than the one I came up with. And again, those suggestions are where you're flexing your own writing muscles. Because once you go down that path of making suggestions, you're prompting your brain to problem solve rather than just delete or shut down. And that suggestion may not work at all in your partner's story, but it may be exactly what you need in a manuscript that you're working on 6 months from now. So I absolutely 100% recognize that this strategy adds an incredible amount of time to writing critiques, but none of that time is wasted because as you're working on your partner's manuscript, you're also working on your own writing skills. Okay, number 6, leave yourself notes. And I think this is probably something that a lot of us already do, but we don't think of them as notes. We read through and leave our partner comments. What I'm asking you to do in this strategy is try to detach those things from one another. You're going to leave yourself notes. Those are for you. Before you send it back to your partner, you're going to turn those notes into comments. Those are for your partner. So they're two arms of the same tree, but they've got two different purposes. And I think that this helps us avoid becoming harsh because there's a lot of times where I'm rolling through a manuscript and I think, ugh, God, this happens over and over and over again. And if I wrote a comment in that moment, it could come out way harsher than I intended to. And by the end of the manuscript, it turns out, you know what, in the grand scheme of things, that it happened for a couple of chapters. It was really a pretty minor thing. But now I've left that comment hanging there. Instead, maybe I leave myself a note. And I'm not going to censor that note. I am going to put down there, this pacing doesn't work. Because that's not for my partner. That's for me. And then I'm going to step away from that manuscript when I'm done. I am going to take a deep breath and walk away from it. I might jot myself some notes that come to mind, but I'm not going to open that document again until I've had some time to reflect. No, listen, within reason. Don't ghost your partner for 6 months because you need that much time to reflect. But a day, through the end of the week, the weekend, give yourself some time to reflect. And then I'm not going to ask you to read the whole manuscript again. I do it as an editor, but I get paid to do it. As a critique partner, I don't expect you to read that same manuscript twice, but you are going to read all of your notes twice. You're going to skip from note to note to note. And you're going to delete the ones that you realized later really weren't necessary. Questions that you had that were answered, or things that started out seeming like a big deal, and then sort of by the end you realize weren't such a major problem after all. And here's where you get to take those notes and make a conscious effort to phrase them in a way that your partner is going to be able to process them. You wrote them inward facing. This pacing doesn't work. Now you're going to revise them, just like you would revise absolutely anything else you're writing. You're going to revise them. You're going to make them outward facing. Instead of this pacing doesn't work here, you're going to take the time to think, okay, how can I write that in a way that my partner is going to be able to process it? How am I going to make it outward facing? Number 7. I think that a good strategy for those of us who worry about our critiques being too harsh is to be very careful before you opt to use first person language or second person language. In fact, I would almost go so far to say that when you're writing a critique, make third person your default. And this is really just one of those semantic things, but it has pretty real consequences in terms of how your partner is going to read those comments. You know, when we use first person, I don't get this. I don't see where you're going. I don't like that. It feels like an attack, right? Or this didn't make sense to me. Well, that's easy to dismiss, right? Okay, well, didn't make sense to you. But if I can frame that in third person, if I can say, instead of I'm lost here, you know, readers may be lost here. Suddenly there's distance. That's not a personal critique. That's not, I just don't like this. That's, as somebody who's the stand-in for your reader right now, I just want to highlight this up to you. Same thing with second person. There's a reason that our high school and college, our high school teachers, our college professors told us not to use you in formal papers because it reads aggressive. You did this. You don't do enough of this. Automatically, my partner is going to be on the defense. Instead, if I can say to them, you know, your narrator says this here, but they said this there, and that doesn't quite match up. Well, I just created some distance. My partner isn't the problem. The narrator just made a mistake. Now, listen, I get it. I'm not that confused that I don't know that my partner is the one who wrote the narrator's voice. But when my partner reads that, they're going to go, oh, yeah, I didn't make a mistake. I need to fix it, but it's sort of a problem with my narrator. And I don't think my partners are lost either. I think they know they wrote it. But if you can put it in those terms, there's a problem here with your narrator did, or there's a problem here with what Mary says in this scene. That just gives that a little enough detachment that it doesn't come through as a personal attack. And I have a couple of examples. So, you know, in the first one, that is all first and second person. You lost me here. You didn't set up the conflict. I don't, it doesn't make sense to me. And again, my partner's going to go, you know, maybe you're just not bright enough to make sense of it. I'm going to dismiss all of your other comments. Now I've just wasted their time and mine. In the second one, though, I'm giving them all the same information, but I'm shifting it. I'm shifting it into third person. You know, I'm wondering if readers might stumble here, because Mark and Ella are doing this thing. And then we find out later about this thing about Mark. So maybe your narrator could do some work here. This is not a personal problem. This is not my inability to get what you're doing. This is something structural in the text that maybe you can fix with your characters. And I only use the first person in a couple of cases, and that may not work for you, but it works pretty well for me. I use the first person when I'm giving praise. I laughed here, or I love this, or I wanted to hug that guy right here. Because I want that to be personal. I want my partner to know, like, you brought me joy. Thank you for that. Or I use the first person when I'm being self-deprecating. I might have this wrong, or I might have missed this. But other than that, I try to avoid the first person wherever I can. All right, strategy number 8, engage with the text. Because at the end of the day, we're more likely to trust the opinion of someone who we believe is really invested in our work. People who can levy criticism, they're a dime a dozen. But when you've got a partner who you know is really invested in your work, you can take much harsher critiques from them. If I have a partner who I know is really invested in seeing me succeed, or who really loves one of my characters, and they drop something that, you know, in another context might feel kind of harsh. This character feels really cold in this scene. I'm not going to take that the way I might if I had a partner who was just going through and picking out what they saw as plot mistakes. I'm going to take that critique and go, you know what? They're pointing this out to me because they love that character so much. They just want that character to be better. Or they're pointing this out to me because they think this will make me a better writer or make this manuscript stronger, not because they get great joy in finding all the faults in my plotline. And I think it really helps you to identify the positive when you're really digging deep into somebody's text. So let's just go back to one of the examples from before. So this was my example, I think, from strategy 4. In that first one, you know, it's clear that I've got a basic gist of what's going on in the plot line, but it's not so clear that I have paid any more attention to this book than just, you know, surface level facts. And then in the second one, my partner is going to be able to tell a little bit more. Okay, I understand a little bit of the context of this story beyond just point to point. But in that last one, well, listen, now my partner knows that I've got this sort of timeline jumping going in here. I've been all the way to the end before I came back to make sure that this suggestion was worth its weight. Or, you know, reading this, I know that my partner gets that Carl is really my main character's rock. And so if she's going to confide this in anybody, she's going to confide it in Carl. That partner is invested in that work. So when that partner points out something to me that in any other circumstance might feel harsh, I'm going to be able to hear it because I know it's just because they're trying to make it better. Okay, strategy number 9. Consider a cover letter. This is my way of avoiding those wall of notes. So if you were uncomfortable with strategy number 2, where I told you step away from the red pen, don't point everything out, here's where you get to dig in a little bit more. Because instead of picking out every single time my partner has a shift in verb tense, I'm going to make myself a note. There's a lot of shifting in verb tense. Happens a lot in chapter 3, happens a little bit in chapter 4, and then all the way to the end of the manuscript. I'm not going to point every single one of those shifts out, but I'm going to sit down and write a big picture letter to my partner that says, hey, on a grand scale, on a global scale, here's some of the things I really loved. And then here's some of the things that I noticed came up over and over again. So it's going to prevent me from nitpicking at those little details. It's going to make me think about problems in the text that are global, that affect the entire manuscript, not just individual sentences and scenes. And I'm not going to point out every one. I'm going to say, hey, I noticed some verb shift tensing, and I left you a note a couple of places where I saw it. I'm going to go back. I'm going to leave them a note a couple of places where I saw it. Hey, I mentioned this in my cover letter. You're shifting here and here and here. And then I am going to trust my partner to make those revisions. I am going to hand ownership back over to them. It is not my responsibility to point out every verb tense shift. It's just my responsibility to help my partner recognize that it's there so that they can go back and take care of it themselves. It's their baby. They can handle it. And again, I think that writing a cover letter is one of the best ways to improve your own writing because it makes you think about other people's writing on a big picture scale, which I think is really tough to do with your own writing. We get kind of immersed in scenes and sentences and maybe chapters, and it's hard to take a step away and think about what are the strengths of my manuscript, what might be some of the weaknesses. But as you start to do that more and more for your partners and think about projects kind of as a full manuscript, it helps you think about your own project like that and go, I really love this scene, but if I was my partner, I would tell them that this is messing up all the pacing in this chapter. I would tell them to cut it. You're going to be able to have those big picture things jump out to you easier. And then my last one, encourage questions. This is a super simple one. Whenever I send something back to my critique partner or a client, I always end it with, if you have any questions about what I wrote, let me know. If you want to tell me where you think I got it wrong, let me know. If you have any feedback, let me know. Because that's how I'm creating that ongoing relationship with my partner. And that's how I prevent myself from thinking, I need to pick out every flaw in this one because I might not get another chance. Nope. This is my partner. I am here for them when they need me. They're going to come back and ask me questions. And I might say, yeah, that looks great now. I noticed something similar down the line in chapter 24. Maybe you want to do something similar there. I don't have to hit it all in that one draft because we're going to be together for a long time. And I think that this really just sets the tone for your comments, again, in one of those strange semantic ways. But it's like the idea that we say things on the internet that we would never say to somebody's face, right? When you're writing your critique, you're going to be a lot more encouraging, and you're going to think more about whether your comments are too harsh. If you think, hey, this person's probably going to email me back, I want to keep this nice and cool. We're going to make this relationship work. And so I encourage questions because it keeps me in check. If this person may come back and call me out on it, I want to be ready for it. So if I said it, I want to be able to stand behind it and tell them how I think it will help them build their story. So those are my strategies. Last bit, I promise I'll do super quick. You guys have been incredibly patient. Just whether or not you do any of the strategies, any of those 10 strategies, whether you pull 2 of them out, shove the rest in your toolkit, whether you try all of them, whether none of them work for you at all, I'm going to encourage you, always revise your comments. So if you're not distinguishing between notes and comments, you're reading and leaving comments for your partner, always go back and reread your comments before you send them out. Again, take a step away. Feel your feelings. If that manuscript was super frustrating and you just needed to have a minute or a day or a weekend to work that through, do it. It's going to make you a better partner. Feel your feelings, sleep on them, and then read those questions, read those comments again with these questions in mind. At this point, are any of the things I said moot? Did I have a question about something that by 2 chapters down the line was answered? Or did I make a suggestion about something to add that's actually in the book near the end? I can delete out those comments. They don't need those comments. Am I the reader for this book? That's a tough one. That takes some soul searching. But I think we all have that book, right? That's written in the genre that we really love. It's on a subject we really love. Lots of people who like the same things we do really like that book, and we just don't. We just don't like it. Just can't get on board with it. I'm just not the reader for that book. I know that. It's not the author. They've got everything there that's supposed to be there. It's just not for me. That doesn't mean I can't give them feedback, but I want to remember that. I want to remember that when I'm giving kind of personal feedback, I'm veering into harsh territory because I'm not the reader for that book. I'm going to give feedback based on the people who are the reader for that book. Did my partner meet their own goals for the work? So I've got a partner, they're planning on self-publishing, and I have made, and they've written a fantastic story, but it's written in a third-person omniscient narrator. And right now, publishing houses aren't picking those up. And so I go through and pick that narrator apart. Well, guess what? That doesn't matter to them. They met their own goal. It's a beautiful story. And it doesn't matter to them if an agent or an editor is going to love that narrator. It works. So it's not, did my partner meet the goals that I am setting up for them? Did they meet their own goals? Am I thinking like a reader, or am I thinking like a writer? And again, I think a good critique partner has to do both. But I think that there are some times where we need to think Does my partner need to know this because it is my pet peeve? They use that semicolon wrong, and I am going to point out every time because it is my pet peeve. Or does my partner need to know this because I think people other than me might be confused by this point, or I think that punctuation might be distracting. So as much as I'm thinking like a writer, I also need to leave comments that reflect being a reader. Do I offer suggestions for every critique? Again, you don't have to use that tool. You don't have to use that strategy. But I want you to think about, if not, if I haven't left a suggestion, why not? Is it just because I don't have a good idea, or just because, I really don't have the bandwidth to dig in that far? Okay, that's perfect. That's a perfectly acceptable reason not to leave a suggestion. But if it's just because you're being dismissive, I haven't left a suggestion because it's so terrible, it's not even worth a suggestion, that's a problem. And I want you to try to recognize those, because that's the stuff that reads really harsh on the other end. And then the last one is, what are the patterns? If I've got 25 notes about stiff dialogue, I don't have to point that out 25 times. I can leave one note, or I can write a cover letter. But if I'm not, I can leave one note that says to my partner, hey, I noticed that sometimes this character gets a little bit stiff in the dialogue. Here's one spot I noticed it. There are a few more. And then I'm turning it back to them. If you have any questions, let me know. But they have everything in them to make that dialogue better. And if they don't, they're going to ask me a follow-up question. So if I find a pattern, I'm going to reduce the red. I'm going to delete out some of those comments and give them something big picture to hang their hat on. That's it.
That was great. I mean, I have so many notes, super helpful tips all around. We do have one question. If anybody else wants to ask a question, feel free to use the chat button, and we can go ahead and ask Jackie. So one question from Anton. My critique partner says she feels uncomfortable with compliments. How can I be encouraging without flat out complimenting her work?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. So, and Anton, if I am kind of misreading this scenario, send a follow-up. But what I'm guessing makes them uncomfortable is those moments that I do a lot. I laughed so hard here, or this is amazing. This is great. I could see how that could make someone, I don't know, I want those, but I could see how that could make someone uncomfortable. If you can shift it so that it's not about, hey, you did something great here. It's, hey, this aspect of what you're doing just works really well. I just want to point out to you that this is something that works really well. I think maybe that can take some of the sense that maybe if someone is just blowing smoke at us and telling us they like things just to give us a head pat. But if I say, not like, I really laughed here, instead, hey, the dialogue, I think the dialogue works really well here. There's a really nice back and forth, or this reads really naturally. I'm not giving them an over in their face compliment, but I am telling them when something works. Does that help, Anton?
I bet it does. No, that's a really good way to think about it. Yeah. Thank you, Jackie from Anton. We have 1 minute left. So if you want to turn to the next slide, I'm just going to go very briefly over that. Of course, Jackie is one of our pro critiquers, so feel free to find her under the search pro critiquers function on our website. She offers a number of services, beta rating, and other editing and critique services. So we're super excited to have her. As you can tell, she's an expert on all things editing. So, and that's it. Thanks to everybody for joining. We will have a recording of this event up on our website very soon. And thank you everybody for joining, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone.